Hi everybody, welcome to Pino's Palette in Chesterfield. My name is McKenna. I'm going to be your artist today. So welcome all of my Maryville kids. I know that you guys are celebrating homecoming, so happy homecoming. I'm so excited that you guys are deciding to paint with me today. So this is going to be our lovely painting that we're working on. This is called Crimson Pathway. So this is what we're going to be working on. So I'm going to be painting this step by step right here on this lovely blank canvas, and you guys are going to be following along with me. So for those of you that have never done this before, maybe you're feeling a little bit nervous, don't stress, it's meant to be fun. If you guys want to change anything, add anything, leave anything out, take your own creative liberties with this, I totally encourage you to do so. This is your own creative expression, so anything that you want to do to make these your own is just going to make it that much more fun. So even though I'm going to do my best to recreate this painting right here and help you guys do the same, remember anything that you want to change is totally up to you. So like I said, I'm going to be painting it right here step by step. So let's go through some of our materials, right? Of course, first things first, we've got our lovely canvas, which is blank right now. So you just got to be nice to it, give it lots of love. And we have 3 paintbrushes that we're going to be using. So I have my big paintbrush, my medium paintbrush, that's going to be the one with the little Frankenstein head, and I've got my little baby paintbrush. So you guys should all be able to tell those apart, right? Not rocket science. This big brush is going to be for kind of our broader brush strokes, our background covering a lot of space. The medium brush is going to be for, you know, some medium things like painting the trees, maybe some of the ground, and then the little baby brush is going to be for your smaller details. So smaller details like the highlights on the trees, you know, the little leaves floating in the sky, those little things. So I do recommend for those of you that have never been here before, or maybe want to use your paintbrushes again in the future, take that little water cup that came in your kits and fill it about halfway with water. And whenever you're not using your paintbrushes, I really encourage you guys to keep those submerged bristles down in your water cups. So the reason that we keep our brushes submerged in our water when we're not using them is because this is acrylic paint. So for those of you that don't know, acrylic paint is really cool. It's actually a plastic-based paint. So it's literally made out of liquid plastic, which is great because it dries quickly. It's easy to cover up mistakes, but that also means that it will dry very quickly in your paintbrushes if they get left out with paint in them. So just for the longevity of the paintbrushes, maybe for the future if you want to use them again, or even just for today to get through this painting, just make sure you're keeping those in your water cup when you're not using them. Because it dries in the paintbrushes pretty quickly, that also means that it will dry in your clothes very quickly. So just try and be aware of yourselves and maybe your neighbor if you're sitting next to somebody. Everybody should hopefully have a little plastic apron that they can put on, or maybe an old paint shirt or an old pair of jeans that you don't care too much about. I don't think we'll have too many crazy accidents today. We're not splatter painting or anything, but just to be on the safe side, if you guys do get paint on your pants or your shirt and you catch it while it's still wet, you will be able to scrub it out with soap and water. But once it dries, you're going to be out of luck. It is going to be a paint shirt. So that just means you're going to have to keep painting, or you're going to have to wear that shirt next time you come to see us in the studio here in Chesterfield. So just keep those things in mind. For those of you that have maybe been to our studio or are interested in coming to our studio, we really recommend it. We're doing in-person classes now, so that's really exciting. And we have been here for going on 9 years now. We're actually the very first Pino's Palette location in the entire state of Missouri. So that's really cool. For those of you that maybe are old enough to drink, I'm not sure how old you guys are in college, but we do sell beer and wine here. And we do also, you know, allow people to bring their own. So we're actually the only studio in the entire state that is BYOB and a bar, for those of you that are legal. So keep those things in mind if you guys ever come and see us in the studio. But I believe that is everything. So let's go ahead and get started painting. So we're just going to start with the background and start building from there. So I'm going to use my big brush. So I want you guys to go ahead and pull that big brush out of the water cup. You can go ahead and use that little paper towel, right? That's going to be for patting out extra water, wiping off extra paint, and then your little palette of colors. So if you guys have your paint in those little cups, you're more than welcome to pull it directly from those cups, or if you want to put it on your paper plate, you can also pull it from the paper plate. So we should have black and white, red, green, and blue, and then we also have this extra paper plate, and this is going to be for mixing our colors. This is also kind of a nice space for, you know, wiping off extra paint, trying out certain techniques with your brush before you commit to it on the canvas. So just kind of a nice little catch-all space, but we'll go ahead and start with the background. So I pulled my big brush out of the water cup, I wiped off the water, and I'm just going to start with plain white paint. So I'm just going to load that big brush up with white, and I'm going to start painting right across the center of my canvas, probably about a 6-inch chunk right through the middle. So I am just going to do crisscross brush strokes. It's going to be really messy. It's going to be really loose. I want to be able to see some texture in there. So don't worry about having it be perfectly smooth. I know that this is going to be a little bit hard for you guys to see because it's white paint on a white canvas, but we're just painting in these kind of like messy zigzags, crisscross brush strokes right through the center of our canvas. I hope that you guys are listening to some music where you're at, jamming out a little bit, having a party. Music always makes painting more fun. Okay, so adding in white, and there's a big chunky section right here through the middle, lots of X's, lots of zigzags, just kind of messy brush strokes through the center there. Now I'm going to start working my way up a little bit, so I'm actually not going to rinse out my brush at all. I want it to have a little bit of white paint in it. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of black. With white and black paintbrush, I'm going to start working my way up. So I'm blending right at the top of my white, just kind of by slightly painting over that wet white paint. And then gradually, as I work my way towards the top, I'm adding in little bits of black. And I'm also going to start adding in little bits of blue. So we're adding in black and blue to our white as we work our way up. And the goal is to kind of have all of these blend and mix together to give us this pretty blue slate color. It's pretty dark, so again, that's kind of personal preference, but if you guys really want to load up the black and the blue towards the top, so we have this nice kind of ominous smoky feel towards the top of our canvas, then go ahead and kind of make it as dark as you'd like. If it gets a little bit too intense, just use a little bit more white. Also, if you guys are having a tough time blending between the darker colors and the white, it maybe just looks like two big chunks, use a little bit more white paint to kind of soften that transition. So I am just going to work on the top part of my canvas here, kind of pulling down into the white a little bit so I have a nice smooth transition, and then pulling the white back up, and then just continuously adding in black and blue and kind of this smoky look on the upper part of my canvas. So I'm going to let you guys work on that. I'm going to work on the same thing, just keeping my brush with a little bit of white and then gradually adding in black and blue. As you guys paint on your canvases, if you would like to wrap the paint around the edges and paint the top or the sides, you're more than welcome to. This is not a mandatory step, but if you're planning on hanging it on a wall, I do always recommend that people just kind of paint the edges at least a little bit where the color wraps around. That way it just looks a little bit more finished and you don't have to worry about framing it. You guys can see as I'm doing this, right, you can really see a lot of my brush strokes. It's not very smooth at all. I'm really kind of leaning into that texture. So if you guys can really see, you know, the individual brush strokes, I think that looks really cool, especially for this painting. So if that's stressing you out, I would say try not to stress about it too much, because that's kind of what we're going for. So I'm going to use a little bit more plain white paint right here to kind of soften that edge. If your white has already started to dry, you can just pick up some more, but if your white is pretty wet still, you can just kind of pull from there and work your way up. Okay. So here is the top half of my canvas. So you can see I've got kind of my chunk of white right here, and then as I work my way up, I have little bits of black and blue. I went a little bit heavier on the black for this top portion, so we're gonna do a little bit darker up here with the black and a little bit more blue down here, but we're still using both black and blue in both. Just, you know, as you guys are working, you can kind of add a little bit more black towards the top. We're gonna do the same thing mirrored towards the bottom, just with a little bit more blue this time. So this is what it looks like. Kind of strokey and messy, a little bit abstract. When you guys are finished with the top section, just kind of start working on the bottom. Again, it's the exact same thing. We're just going to do a little bit more blue. We want a lot of brush strokes. Remember, you can always add more white as we go. We really want the white to be nice and wet as we add in our next color, so we get lots of mixing. We get that pretty slate color. So we are covering up quite a bit of our white. You guys can kind of see here, I've still got a clear, lighter area. Even though I'm pulling little bits of blue, little bits of gray into the white check section, it's still predominantly lighter than the top and the bottom. So if you guys have kind of lost that, if you've lost your lighter section, rinse out your brush or wipe it off and just go back in with plain white. And with the plain white, you should be able to cover up some of those areas and kind of pull back down into the top or up into the top or down into the bottom, just to kind of redefine the center of your canvas. Again, it is supposed to look really messy, so don't worry about that. That's not the issue, but we do, even though it looks messy, we want it to not be just 3 chunks of color. We want them to be relatively gradual transitions. So this is what I've got right here. So I have my darker grays, but still touches of blue up here. I've got my middle area that's a little bit more white, and then I've got my grayish blues down here, but that are a little bit more blue. So remember, if you guys want to paint the edges, to go ahead and wrap the paint around the edges. But when you're finished with this, go ahead and put your big brush in the water cup. I'm gonna give you guys a minute or two to work on this. Of course, this is on demand, so if you guys need to pause me to catch up, that's totally fine. But as soon as you're finished with that, just go ahead and put that big brush in the water cup. I'm gonna wait a minute and let you guys keep working. But if you need a little bit of extra time, of course you can take it. And our next step is going to be some of our background trees. So just to kind of start thinking ahead. Okay, so once we have finished with our background, you guys are going to put those big brushes in the water cup. We're going to start working on some of our background trees next. So the trees that are a little bit further in the distance are going to be a little bit lighter. So we're going to be mixing kind of a gray color, similar to what we did in the background here. So I want you guys to pull that little brush out of the water cup, dry it off on your paper towel. And we're going to take 2 scoops of white. So when I say a scoop, I'm going to use my little brush like a shovel. I'm going to go into the side of my white paint and I'm going to take a scoop just like that. And then to get it off of my brush and onto my plate, I'm going to give it a little twist. So I'm going to do that 2 times. So 2 scoops of white right on top of each other onto that mixing plate. And then without rinsing that little brush, I'm going to take a half a scoop of black, add it right on top, and a half a scoop of blue. So a half a scoop is just like half of what you used of the white. So 2 scoops of white, a half a scoop of black, and a half a scoop of blue, and we're going to swirl those together on your mixing plate. So we should have kind of a light gray, kind of bluish tint to our color. So that's what I have right there. So that's just with the little brush. If you guys have something that's a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, it's going to be totally fine. Anything close will be fine. So we're going to start working on our trees in the background. So you guys can see these tall, skinny trees that kind of hide in the background behind our trees in the foreground, our focal points. So on the left side, we have 4, and on the right side, we have 3. So that's just what I'm going to be doing up here, but of course you guys can add in as many or as few trees as you want. I'm not going to worry too much about getting all the way down to the bottom because we're going to be adding in this black landmass here in a little bit. So if they don't come all the way down to the bottom, don't stress. We do want them to go all the way up to the top though. They are going to be going off the top of the canvas. So I'm just going to pick up some of this color on my little brush and start painting in my trees. So I'll walk you guys through one of them and then you can just kind of paint at your own speed. So I'm going to start on the left and work my way across. So I'll start with this tree furthest over here on the left-hand side. And I'm just going to measure about 3 fingers from this left-hand side. And I'm going to start with the line. So again, I'm not really too worried about getting all the way down to the bottom of my canvas. I'm also not too worried that my background is still a little bit wet. I'm just painting right on top of it. So a line as straight as you can get it, right? It's a tree, so it does not have to be perfectly straight by any means, because trees are all different and all a little wonky. I'm just going to start kind of mapping out a very imperfect line right up the center of that canvas. Like I said, if your background is wet and your tree kind of picks up some of that color, not a big deal. So I went ahead and I'm going to make my tree a little bit thicker, a little bit wider than just the original, little line. So you guys can go ahead and start to build up your little gray tree, just building from that original line. With these trees in the background, I would say maybe err on the side of a little bit thinner. Again, totally a personal preference, but we don't want them to be huge and kind of take over. They're just meant to be a subtle little accent in the back. So I would say stick on the thinner side. And from there, we're going to start adding in some branches. So I've got my tree going all the way up to the center, or all the way up, excuse me, to the top of my canvas. And I'm going to start adding in branches. So I'm just going to kind of start right here and think about making a Y. So I've got kind of the base of my Y. And I'm going to paint right up all the way off the top. You guys see that okay? So I've got my original line that I made a little bit thicker, and then I just added in my first branch right there. So if you guys are having a hard time at all getting these to kind of show up, or they're not really gliding across the canvas as easily as you want it to, your paintbrushes may be feeling a little bit sticky, something that I'll do sometimes as I'm doing this is adding a little bit of water to my paint. We don't want to add so much water that it's going to drip down the edge, but by adding water, you can just make the paint a little bit thinner. It gives it more of an inky consistency. So just kind of dip your little brush into your water cup and add a little bit of water to that mixture. And then you guys can continue to make more of that mixture as needed. It's just 2 scoops of white and a little dab of black and a dab of blue, or a half a scoop, I guess. So I'm just going to keep working my way across. I'm going to start working on my next tree. So I'll probably leave maybe 4 fingers in between this one. Start with my line. It's totally fine if those trees overlap too, if you end up having some branches that kind of crisscross. And luckily these are just the background trees, so I feel like it's a pretty good warm up for when we do the trees in the front. You guys can kind of get the hang of what the motion is going to be like and figure out what works for you with your trees. So this is essentially what I'm going to be doing all the way across. I'm going to do 4 more on the left side, leave a little bit of a space here in the middle, and then do 3 on the right. And you don't have to go all the way down to the bottom, but get relatively close so we don't have any trees floating in midair once we add in our little landmass. But if you guys need to make some more of that paint, 2 scoops of white, half a scoop of black, and a half a scoop of blue, and we're just going to start adding in some trees. You can give them as many branches as you want. A lot of it's going to be covered by our leaves in the front anyway, so I wouldn't stress too much. Again, just kind of a little accent in the back. There's my 4 trees on the left. I just kind of started mapping in my trees on the right-hand side. So I'm just going to start to build up those trunks and then add in the branches the exact same way. You can see I left a little chunk of space right here, kind of my clearing in the forest. Remember, a little bit of water helps if you're having a hard time. I'm just adding some water to my paint right now. Again, not so watery that it's gonna drip down the canvas, but just enough that it makes it a little bit inkier, kind of an ink pen consistency. And you'll find that right away that just helps the paintbrush glide so much easier. Okay, so here are my little gray trees. So I did 4 on the left, all kind of random distances apart. Left my pretty big chunk of space in the middle. Then I did 3 on the right-hand side. Again, just kind of random distances. I did some a little closer, some a little further apart. I've got some branches that kind of end anywhere. A lot of them are just going straight off the top of the canvas. So that is totally personal preference, however you guys choose to do it. Again, they're just the background trees, so not the focal point. I wouldn't stress too much about them. But when you're finished with that, go ahead and put the little brushes in the water cups. Those can hang out for a second. And as soon as you're finished, you put the little brush in the water cup. We're gonna go back to the big brush for just a second. So you can go ahead and rinse that out. So to rinse that big brush, just kind of swirl it around the bottom of your cup, kind of push those bristles into the bottom. Give it a scrape on the side and pat it dry. So a lot of my background in my trees in areas is still a little bit wet. That's not a big deal at all. So if you're kind of in the same boat as me, I wouldn't stress too much. Of course, if it's like sopping wet and really, kind of globbed on there, I would maybe wait a minute before this next step. But just a little bit damp or tacky is gonna be totally fine. Not a big deal at all. So I've done all of my background trees. If you guys are still working, keep doing your thing. You can pause me and resume. And as soon as you're finished, put the little brush in the water cup. We're gonna use the big brush, right? The big one we used for the background. And we're gonna pick up some plain black paint. And with this black paint, we're gonna do our landmass, our ground down here at the bottom. So as we do the hill, we're gonna note that it's a little bit higher on the left-hand side and then kind of drops down as it tapers off to the right. So I'm gonna measure about 4 fingers on the left-hand side of my canvas. And I'm gonna paint in the outline for my first little hill. I'm gonna kind of slope towards the bottom as I get nearer to the center. And I'm just using that big brush to map it out. And then kind of drop my land down over here, but it can still have a little bit of a hill to it, a little hump. Just because it's ground, we don't want it to be totally perfectly straight. But once you guys kind of have that line painted in, we're just gonna fill in this bottom part with black. So if you guys are painting the edges, you can wrap the black paint around the sides. And if you really wanna get crazy, you can paint the bottom of the canvas too. So there's my ground. So once you guys have painted in this bottom section, we've got our little hills painted in with our big brush and black paint. Go ahead and put those big brushes back in the water cup. We're going to move on to our medium brushes. So that's going to be the one with the little Frankenstein head. You guys could also use your little brushes if you prefer. For this step, it's just kind of whatever you feel comfortable with. Our trees in the foreground, our black trees, are going to be a little bit bigger. So just for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to use a brush that's a little bit bigger. But that's just my personal preference. If you would prefer to take your time with the smaller brush and you like those really crisp little lines, you're more than welcome to do that. Just kind of whatever works best for you. With our three main black trees in the foreground, we're definitely going to water down this paint. So I'm going to take a couple scoops of black just right onto my mixing plate with the medium brush, and I'm going to add some water from my cup right into this black mixture. Again, we don't want it to be so watery that it's going to drip, but just by adding some water, making it a little bit more transparent and a little bit more thin, it's going to glide so much easier on the canvas. So I've got my watery black paint, I've got my medium brush, and I'm going to go ahead, before I worry about any of my branches, I'm just going to map out where I want these trees to go. So I'm just going to start with 3 lines where the trees are going to be. So I'm going to start with my tree farthest to the left. I'm just going to start with a line so that I can build from that. I'm going to map out my second tree. And then I'm going to map out my third tree. So there's my 3 skinny little black lines, just straight up from the ground all the way up towards the top. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. And once I have those painted in with that medium brush, I'm just going to start to build. So I want to make my trunks a little bit wider. I want to add branches. So I'm going to map out my branches first, right? I've got my middle line, my trunk of my tree, and I'm just going to start adding in Ys, just like we did for the back one tree, excuse me, just like we did for the back trees, except for on the front ones, we want them to be a little bit more detailed, so we're going to add quite a few more branches. So we're just painting right over our background trees. And I'm just adding in all of these little Ys, kind of gradually going upwards towards the top of the canvas. Those are going to overlap. You guys can really go as crazy with this as you want. And then once you have those branches kind of mapped in, we're going to go back to the main trunk and we're going to make that core part of the tree thicker. So I'm just going to add some more black paint. I'm going to widen that line. And we want it to be wider all over that whole center line, but we really want it to be wider towards the bottom. So we're thinking about the trunk of a tree. So I'm going to gradually pull my paintbrush out to widen the actual trunk of my tree where it goes into the ground. The same theory kind of applies as you guys start to work on the branches. I went ahead and mapped everything out first, but now that I'm going back over it, the same way that we make the trunk of the tree towards the bottom of the canvas a little bit wider, as you have the branches kind of come into the tree, we also want the base of the branch to be a little bit wider. So it's kind of tapering towards the end. That point of the branch is going to be as thin as we can get it. And then as it comes in towards the tree, we're going to make it a little bit wider. So I am going to finish up this tree really quick, and then I'll bring it nice and close for you guys to take a close study at it. And then we're just going to keep working on our other two trees in the exact same way. Okay, so here is my finished first tree. So you can see I made the whole line wider. I just built right on top of that initial line. I've got it gradually getting slightly wider towards the bottom, towards this black hill. And then here are all of my little branches. So there's no real number of branches, like there's no magic number. Trees are all going to be a little bit different, so you guys can really add as many or as few as you want. It's totally up to you. But you can see, right, I just kind of did these little organic kind of weird looking Y shapes. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing on my other two trees. So you guys can kind of do this at your own pace. I'm just going to water down some more black paint and keep on chugging along. Of course, if you want to switch over to that little brush, you're more than welcome to. I'm having an okay time with the medium brush, so that's just my personal preference. But if you're having a hard time getting really skinny, little branches and you like the way that that looks, then I would say switch over to the smaller brush. Okay. So here are my 3 black trees. I started on the left and I just worked my way over. You guys can see they got progressively wigglier, kind of a little bit more spooky. So I kind of went with that. I actually like the way they look a little bit more crooked, but that's just me. So you guys can kind of do them however you want. But if you're feeling kind of insecure about them because they're not straight, I would just say it's almost Halloween. So the wigglier, the better. But there's my trees. You can see, right, my trunks are a little bit wider and then my branches kind of taper as they come towards the top and the outsides of my canvas. I've got lots and lots of branches. They're overlapping. They're all pretty random. So you guys can keep on working on that. If you have any areas that you really don't like or you kind of botched a branch, don't stress too much about that either, because we are going to be adding leaves on top of all of this. So we can use the leaves strategically to cover up the things that we don't like. But again, there is my finished black trees. You guys can keep on working on that. If you're still working on the black. We've got one more step and then we're going to take a little bit of a break to let these dry before we start working on the red. Again, if you guys are still working on the black trees, just keep doing your thing. When you're finished with that though, we are going to put those medium brushes in the water cup and let those rest for a minute. And we're going to go back to our little baby brushes to add some highlights onto our trees. So again, if you guys are still working, just put me on pause and catch up. But otherwise, go ahead and put that medium brush in the water cup. And we're going to move on to our little baby brush. So give it a little rinse, pat it dry in your paper towel. And we're going to start talking about highlights. So highlights, we want to be consistent. So the highlights are really just going to go on our main 3 trees up front. I'm not worried at all about the trees in the background. They don't need anything. But our 3 trees in front, we want to give a little bit of a dimension to them, give them a little bit of a rounded shape, and make it look like the light is hitting one particular side. So when we're thinking about a shadow or a highlight, we just want to be consistent with that because the light source is going to be consistent. So if the light is coming from right here, over here on the left-hand side, it's going to be hitting the trees also along the left-hand side on every single tree. So you guys can really make the light source anywhere that you want, but wherever you decide to make it, just be consistent with it. So you could do, your highlights only over here on the right side of your tree, but if you do it on the right, it needs to be on the right on all 3 trees. So just kind of keep that in mind, unless of course you want to do the light source in the center, which is also an option, and then you could have the light source be here, and then do a highlight here, and then on the inside of these 2 trees. So you just kind of got to think about where your light is coming from. On this painting in particular, our light is over here on the left, So our highlight is also going to go on the left side of our trees. So this is going to be primarily on the trunks of our trees. I'm going to do a little bit on the branches, but our branches get kind of thin, so it's okay if we can't really see that much of a highlight. So I want to do this while my painting is still a little bit wet, so that it doesn't get too overwhelming. So my black trees are still a little damp. I'm going to pick up some white. And then over here on the left-hand side of my tree with my little brush, I'm just going to streak in some little white lines. I'm going up my branches just a little bit on the wider ones where I kind of have the space, but so I added in some white. I'm going to wipe off my brush and I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue. And I'm going to do the same thing, focusing on that left-hand side. Again, if we overlap the white and the black a little bit, that's totally cool. So there is my highlight on my first tree. So you can see I kept it primarily over here on the left-hand side. I just kind of streak in some white and some blue. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other 2 trees. a little blue, a little white. If your trees have already dried when you're doing this step, you can always pick up a little bit of black paint too to just kind of mute it. If the white is a little bit too bright, just make it more of a gray shade by adding in some more black. You guys can do just pure white or just pure blue. Both are totally fine, but I'm using a combination of both. Now I'm going to do the same thing on my tree over here on the right-hand side. All right, so here are my finished trunks of my trees. You can see I added that little highlight with blue and black. So once you guys have finished this step, we're gonna take a little bit of a break and let these just kind of dry and sit for a second before we start adding in any of our reds, because we do not want the reds to mix in with our blues or our blacks, because it will just kind of turn into a color that we don't want to see. So we're going to add the highlights into the left side of our trees or the right side, whatever you guys choose. And when you're finished with that, go ahead and put all of your brushes in your water cups. If you guys want to get up, stretch, kind of take a lap, just kind of chill out for a minute and let these dry. I'm going to come back in about 5 minutes to continue working on the reds. But of course, you guys have me on demand, so you can pause me and take as long as you want to finish up or to catch up, and then, you know, to take your break. So I will be right back. I'm just going to give my painting a minute to dry before I start adding in the reds, but I will see you guys in just a minute. All right, guys, if you are still wanting to take a little bit of a break, just keep on doing that. But I am going to keep on moving with this painting right here. So I'm going to start working on some of my reds, my leaves on the ground, and then my leaves in the trees. So that's going to be kind of my process as we add in our color to this lovely painting. But of course, you guys can take your time. Whenever you're ready to move on, I am going to start with the medium brush with my paint down here. So go ahead and rinse out that medium brush. Get it nice and dry on our paper towel. And I am just going to start with plain red paint. So I'm just going to dip that clean medium brush into the red, and I'm going to start over here again on the left and work my way over. We've got quite a bit of red up here on our hill because we have a lot of space here to fill. So with the red on my medium brush, I'm just going to start dashing in these little leaves. So we're really building it up. The dashes are really irregular, they're overlapping, they're kind of messy, there's no real pattern to them. The more that you can just be loose with it, I think definitely the better, which I know can be challenging for some of my more type A painters. But just try and let go, you know, just random little dashes along your hill and then across the bottom as well. I'm just going to keep on picking up my red and just kind of dashing that in right on top of the black. So really, as much or as little as you guys choose. If you really love the red and you want the whole ground to be covered with leaves, then I say knock yourselves out, go for it. But you know, if you're maybe happy with your painting being a little bit more ominous and spooky, you don't want so many bright colors, and you want to just kind of stick with a more neutral palette, then you can definitely do that as well. I think it just kind of depends on your personal preference and what you're trying to accomplish. But I think the red is pretty, so I'm going to add it in. I think it's kind of nice too, because we're painting the red on top of the black. Even though the red is really vibrant, we can still kind of see some of the black coming through. So it keeps it from being too totally in your face. So I really like that. So I think that even though we're adding in red and we're adding in a bright color, the overall tone of this painting is still a little bit on the darker side, which I think makes it really pretty. So we're just adding in the red down here along the bottom, and then without rinsing that medium brush, I'm going to dip right into the white paint, and I'm going to add white kind of just in a couple areas right on top of my red. So we don't want to go too crazy with the white, just a little bit. It's going to mix in and give us some pink highlights. So again, really as much or as little as you guys choose. So there's my red along the bottom there. And then you can see it just barely, I added some white along the top. I let the white kind of blend in with the red, so I have some shades of pink, but I don't want that to completely take over, so I was pretty sparing with how much white I added. Once you've added in that white, go ahead and rinse out your medium brush. And we're going to add in just a tiny bit of green down here to the bottom in some of the areas of our hill where our red doesn't quite reach. So if you have red all over your hill and you don't want to worry about the green, you can totally leave this step out. It's very subtle, so it's not going to make or break anything, but you have it as an option if you'd like. So I rinsed out that medium brush. I'm going to pick up some green paint and just kind of focusing more on the corners, more on the darker areas. I'm going to add in some little dashes of green. and it's going to be very subtle because the dark is so, or the black is so dark, the green is not really going to show up a ton. It just gives it a little bit of a tone to it. So again, a total personal preference. If you guys want to leave it out, feel free to leave it out, but I'm just going to streak it into the areas where I still have some black. Be careful not to overlap too much on the red. If you overlap the red and the green, you're going to be mixing complementary colors, which is going to give you probably a shade of brown that you're not really going for. So I'm just going to try and avoid that red and focus on the areas that I still have just plain black. So it's very subtle, but hopefully you guys can kind of see what that looks like. Once you've finished adding in the green, if you chose to do that, go ahead and put that medium brush back in the water cup. It is done. It has served us well. Our last couple steps are going to be with this little baby brush, and that's going to be our leaves just kind of floating in our trees up here. So now you guys are finished, put the medium brush in the water cup. Go ahead and rinse out that little baby brush. And with that baby brush, we're going to work very similarly to the way that we did the bottom down here, where we kind of start with red and then we add in a little bit of white. The only thing that's different is we're not adding green into our trees. So I'm going to rinse out my little baby brush. I'm going to pick up some red paint, and I'm just going to start poking and dashing and very randomly adding in some marks around my trees. So when we're adding in the leaves, we're not putting them in clusters like actually on the branches. They're just kind of floating in space. So they're not really touching any of the branches in particular. They're just overlapping them. So we're starting with red, and I'm just going to really just go in and go crazy and start poking and dashing. It's a very random, very quick motion. You could even really challenge yourself and close your eyes while you do it. So this is really just all around this top portion of our canvas. Anywhere that the branches are relatively, you can have clusters of leaves just kind of floating around them. So again, not really concentrating on where the branches are, just overlapping the general vicinity of all of them. If you're having a hard time getting loose with this, like I said, you can always try and close your eyes and really just go quickly, or you could even try and do it with your non-dominant hand. And that way you really just have to let it happen pretty naturally. Because one thing that we really want, the look that we're going for as we're doing this, is we don't want it to look like a perfect pattern. It's supposed to look a little bit chaotic, like the leaves are just kind of falling and hanging out in space. So anything that you can do to make it less of a perfect pattern, I think the better. So I can do this up close for you guys for a second so you can kind of see exactly what I'm doing on the canvas. So I'm really just kind of working my way across, but I'm just kind of loaded my brush up with red, and I'm just very randomly poking and dashing. So we're just doing that all the way across. Once you've added in the red, we've kind of dashed and poked our way across the top of the canvas. We're just going to take that little baby brush. You don't need to rinse it out. And we're just going to pick up a little bit of white the same way that we did down below. And very sparingly, just pick a couple areas to poke in some white paint right on top of the red. We wanted to mix in a little bit to give us some pink. And I'm just going to do a couple little areas where I add in some of that white paint. And this is our very last step. So really kind of as much or as little of that as you guys want to do. I think maybe more red and more white is going to make your trees, again, like look a little bit fuller, a little bit happier. I think less, you can still kind of see those spooky branches in the background. You're going to get more of that ominous look. So totally personal preference. You can definitely do a lot with how much color you add to this painting with the red and the white, depending on what kind of look you're going for. So something else that I also did, if you guys want to add in, is I added just a couple little dashes for leaves falling towards the ground. Just here and there. But this is my finished painting. So that's where I'm going to stop. So if you guys have anything else that you want to add to this to make them your own, if you want to add a little woodland creature, you're more than welcome to do that. If you're feeling, real confident. But otherwise, when you guys are finished, the only thing that I really encourage you to do is to sign your work. Odds are you've spent close to 2 hours painting this along with me. So you definitely want to make sure you sign it so everybody knows that it's yours. So typically artists sign their work down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So you guys can use that little brush, or if you have a Sharpie, that also works. That is everything that I have for you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in and painting along with me, and happy homecoming to everybody. And I hope to see you in the studio sometime very soon. All right, thanks guys. Bye.